Hello, everyone, and welcome to a masterclass on how do you actually message someone in a way that they will genuinely be interested in responding to you. And that applies not just to investment, that also applies to any communications in business or also, dare I say, personal that you might want to be messaging. And especially when it comes to the VC investments and also LP fundraising, a lot of the times we've got phenomenal startups with the best metrics that actually will not get funded, and that's not because your business isn't good, but this will come down to purely subjective factors such as, "I like him," said by a few investors, or they will be good at raising future rounds, or even the fact that maybe you mumbled the words a little bit in the pitch. There's so many of subconscious micro cues that your body is sending, that your language is sending, the words that you choose to use communicate more behind you than you would think. Even the fact that social proof, you used to know someone. If you know someone who knows someone, always mention it in the first line. It will work to your advantage. Or even the fact that someone else has invested in this company carries weight, because ultimately, especially as we are, there's a lot of talk today on the stages about AI, as we are in 2026 and we are in the second half of the 20s of the 21st century, it's interesting to think how the AI slop has become the defining insult of this year. And as far as insults go, I think this is an interesting breed of an insult because it doesn't attack intelligence or quality of your discourse. It is an attack on identity. It basically says you are replaceable, you are generic, you are not human. So therefore, right now in capital raising, your strategy is only as good as your ability to articulate it. And that is the point to which I have come to work out with so many of the founders, because I used to run my own business. I was the ghost writer of founders' emails. We would be emailing Mark Cuban, cold. We would be emailing A16Z, cold. Sequoia, Boulderton, Greylog, all of the tier ones. I've gotten responses from all of them just cold. They've never met me. I was signing myself off as the founders. And then all I could do is take the screenshots of some of those emails. And with the blessings of my past clients, I can show some of them today. So in sales and communications, we know it takes 7 interactions to close a prospect. Same goes for investors. So if you think of that first cold email, let's say, or let's say you're introduced, that's just the first interaction. You got to follow up. Then you can maybe like or comment on their social media posts. Then you might send a second follow-up. Then bump into them at an event. Then back channeling. How do you get other people to talk about you to that investor when you're not in the room? And then a next follow-up email. And altogether, what that happens is that adds up to a mere exposure effect, which in psychology is the cognitive bias, where we are more biased to select something just because of the mere exposure to it, just because that person's name has popped up on our screen enough times for us to actually notice it. And I study quite a lot on behavioral science, anthropology, and psychology. It's wild to me the times that we're living in right now, because we're not supposed to know hundreds of people. Like 500 years ago, you would only know, let's say, up to 100 people in your village, and that's it. We're not supposed to be connected to 10,000 people on LinkedIn like I am. And so cognitively, our brain's capacity cannot really hold that. So whoever you're connecting on here on LinkedIn at the South Summit, the first thing you should do when you accept their connection request, hey, great to meet you at South Summit. Great to meet you in the speaker's lounge at South Summit. Because if you just leave it blank and 3 years later you look up this person on LinkedIn and the messages are completely blank, where the hell did I meet them? Who are they? And they're not going to remember you either. But seeding those small bits of information for your future self to pick up on is exactly how you change the game to your favor. And typically it takes 7 interactions to land a response from a tier 1 VC, as I found, or just one. So that was the result with one of my clients, Damien, for whom I sent 8 cold emails to 8 different VCs, and 8 of them responded within 4 hours of hitting send. And interestingly, Damien was actually my very first client when I started to run my advisory, and I was like, holy, I'm onto something. So that's then how my business then started. So as an example, let's take Connect Ventures, and we've got a partner, Pietro. The first thing that I would do in this strategy, you navigate onto their LinkedIn, and you're going to look for anything that you can hook onto. Pietro specifically, he says that he writes about venture velocity and a bunch of other things at his newsletter. So then naturally, I would go into the newsletter, I would find something very specific that I can refer to, where he says, venture accelerates your modes and compounds them. Great. I would copy and paste it, drop it into email. Subject line, I like to use the word comment because psychologically we do not know if a comment is positive or negative. And then I also like to use the word your because as humans we're always aligned to pay attention to what is related to us. So if I have that in my email inbox, comment on your article, what do you have to say about my article? Like, let me open this, let me read this. And the first line naturally would be your insight on how venture velocity compound startup modes resonated, but. This is a very strategic use of the word but in the syntax and the semantics of this concrete sentence and where it is placed, because if you think about how emails arrive in your inbox, they actually get cut off at a specific point of, depending on your screen resolution. So you could say, hi, Greg, I've been enjoying your LinkedIn posts, but your involvement, ... I guarantee you, if you send an email like this, your opening rate is going to be so short. And what you have said is, but your involvement with the mental health marketplaces is what resonated with me even more. This is one of the exact emails I have secured a response, I think, within like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, something like this. And the way to execute this correctly is naturally, you need to know what are the email preview characters limits. You don't need to memorize all of them. You just need to know that the shortest one comes from Outlook on a Windows computer on a standard screen resolution, where it will cut you off at just 35 characters exact. And the reason why this is important to you is because the first line of your email becomes this incredible important first impression space. So if you open your email saying, my name's Eva, I'm the co-founder CEO of a startup called, you've just used up 73 of those characters on an email that looks super generic and frankly, AI generated as well. So you need to get down to that 35 characters to make your impact. And however you do it, I would urge you, please don't start it with, I hope this email finds you well, which is exactly 32 characters exact. When you're emailing investors, it is much better to get straight to the business and literally say, I read your report and I like what you said about X. I took a look at your portfolio, I noticed you recently invested in X, and this resonated because I saw your talk at South Summit, and I agree with what you said about this, but what you said about something else. This is how you generate curiosity, this is how you open a conversation, open a discourse, and you're also doing something interesting on the power dynamics level, where you're not, just like, please, investor, give me money. You're more coming from a peer-to-peer perspective where you invest in my space, I build in my space, let's talk and let's exchange insights. Because the reality is a lot of the emails will arrive like this on a phone screen as a notification. As more Gen Z and Gen Alpha are entering the workforce, we all have our phones on us, so you want to ensure that whatever pops up on screen is as impactful as this. Max, looking at your focus on quantum and AI, I read your last month's report. Me and my CTO lead Astralis, a deep tech data SaaS that just landed a $100K enterprise contract. The fact that you, and then cut it off. And as far as cliffhangers go, that is a perfect cliffhanger. And the moment, this is an email paraphrase that one of my clients has sent. The names has been changed. And they got a response, and they landed a call, I think something within like 20 minutes, without even showcasing the pitch deck. No pitch deck, no nothing, just send this email, and then, cool, here's my Calendly, let's chat next week. Fantastic. That's how easily you can land an investor meeting when you're not pitching, but you are very subtly, casually stating the facts. And stating the facts aside, this is like a funny anecdote, because I was recently giving a pitching coaching session to one of my portfolio companies who had, she was finding it problematic to pitch to investors and sound credible. So I literally told her, before you go into a meeting to an investor, I want you to look around the room and state as many boring facts as you can. So for example, the lights are on, this floor is beige, the doors are closed, the sky is blue. State as many boring facts as you can so that your tone of voice, your tonality of the voice, can drop into that tone of a voice that is merely stating facts. Because then when you go into a call and you're going to say, I'm building a 1 billion company, it's just going to sound like a fact. It's just going to sound like the most normal thing in the world that you are doing. And there's a lot to be said on the psychology of what's happening in our brains when we teach ourselves to talk about incredible things in a very down-to-earth manner, like it's the most normal thing in the world. And I would argue that's usually where the magic of entrepreneurship really happens. Because also with the personalization, the reality is that we live in such an attention deficit economy, and the world that is filled with ads and tabs and never-ending social media scrolling feeds, that standing out like this in an email and messages is no longer a nice to have. I would say it's a must to have. And to put things in perspective, I think that is correct that I've read somewhere that in a span of a 30-minute TikTok binge, we can get exposed to more ideas and concepts and thoughts that will fly by than what our ancestors would have been exposed throughout the entirety of their lifetimes. So that really puts things in perspective on like how much of cognitive pressure are we under, and therefore how much more increasingly we're going to be relying on AI. Hi. And so when we message Pietra, we're going to say, your insight on how venture velocity compound startup modes resonated, but only after looking at your recent investments, I thought it would be good to talk. You can and you should be looking at the other investments that the investor has made, not only to find if there is not a competitor on there, but also anyone who you could partner with, who you could do some business with, or who you could sell to, because if you can position yourself as the missing element to that investor's entire portfolio, rather than just a singular standalone bet, that's suddenly when a pitch becomes an ecosystem play, and you stand a much better chance of actually fulfilling their own fiduciary duty that they have to their own LPs. So in this case, we took Magic Bell as this example of a startup that is the founder I was helping to message Connect Ventures, they could partner with them. That's what we said. My co-founder and I built an AI-led data SaaS platform, grew it to 600 users. The data we collect would work magic with Magic Bell's API notification system. It's really cool to use some intelligent linguistics on there too, because AI usually doesn't do that. And as there's more and more AI tools enabling outreach, I think we also start to need to think of how do we sound human in the age of AI when we're emailing someone. And I've even seen founders go as far as making certain grammatical mistakes on purpose so that it wouldn't sound as AI. So it's quite interesting times that we're finding ourselves in. Next, back to the drawing board, what I analyze, aside from LinkedIn, I would just look at simply the investor's website. And the moment you see all of the verticals that they're investing in, let's say AI, health, data, infrastructure, fintech, SaaS, pretty much everything. So that's great. You can really see that you are a fit, but unless you actually put it inside of that email body, then the recipient of that email is not going to really be able to feel that you are genuinely a good fit. And it's as simple as that, as basically grabbing and copying and pasting all of the different things that really show I've done my homework, and I can also communicate it subtly enough so that it doesn't sound performative, and so that it is a bid for connection rather than a bid for pitching. You could also say we're raising 1 million seeds to build out the platform's infrastructure and apply it into the fintech space. So if your future GTM involves a sector in which that investor is investing into, that is fantastic because you can utilize this in a pitch. But also some of my companies that were too early to pitch to a certain investor, but they have been browsing their portfolio pages and they've seen, oh my gosh, this is basically a list of our potential clients. They reached out to an investor asking for introductions to their portfolio. What a great way to start a relationship with an investor, because you're going to be dealing with their portfolio companies. They already know you. And then 3 years later, you can respond to the same email chain with that investor and say, we're actually raising now ourselves. And as far as email closers go and the call to actions, I would say they range from relaxed options that are good for the first cold email to somewhat more hinting options for the first follow-up, to direct options, and to ones that you should not be using at all in your outreach emails. And when it comes to the more relaxed option that I would use in the first cold email, you could say as simply as, can I keep you in the loop? Are you open to connecting? Feel free to keep me in mind. A lot of the times I also skip a call to action in the first cold email because I think on a psychological level, it creates this bit of a silence that the other person might be inclined to fill in. And that works in a conversation too. The person who stays silent and says nothing is usually the person in power, and that will usually make the other person want to fill in the space, disclose more information that maybe they potentially would like to disclose, and a lot of salespeople very much and successfully use silence as a tactic. So by removing the CTA from a first cold email, that is how you create that space. That is how you create that silence. In the follow-up ones, that's when I would actually say, yeah, I would love to connect and chat. If this is in what you find interesting to explore, let's connect, and so on and so forth. And only then, in the next follow-ups and the direct ones, that's when I would be introducing some of the, let's say, timeline on the fundraising, or as like looping in, let's say, your virtual assistant to organize some times for a call. Founders who are early enough, who do not have virtual assistants, I've even seen founders just create a second email with a name and run it, and that's their assistant. So there's plenty of different ways in which people get creative, and it's all about portraying a certain sense of who you are and what your business is. It's purely psychological and purely subjective. Then the first follow-up I would do literally 1 day later as a response to the previous email. And what you would say is, hey, Pietro, just to add some more context to what I said in my note yesterday, another thing that I would do, you can check on their website something else they're saying. So Connect Ventures says you should be an insider with an outsider's perspective, which doesn't mean much, but we can absolutely use it. We can literally say, with my co-founders, 2 decades in AI-driven HR, and myself in software, this is a combination of an insider with an outsider perspective. And what you're doing in here has been actually studied by Harvard Business Review, and that is called linguistic mirroring. And Harvard Business Review found that lawyers who linguistically mirror judges' writing styles, they have more than double the chances of winning the case. And we're literally talking about using the same vocabulary, the same sentence structure, or when you're pitching in person, I would even say the same tone of a voice and mirroring the person on how they sit or where they look, and so on. So really important, I say to a lot of founders when they're pitching on Zoom, do not read from your slides. You have to be looking at that small, tiny window of that person. And also, if they happen to be wearing glasses, it's the best hack, because if there's lights flashing in the glasses, you can tell they're switching tabs. They're not looking at your pitch deck. So that's usually the best point to ask them, do you have any questions? And bring them back to the room. Bring back their attention to you, because human attention ebbs and flows. But the moment you start to look for the cues in people's behavior, you'll be able to control it a little bit better. Pietro also wrote an article in which he said one of their top priorities is creating early liquidity options for their LPs. And this is fantastic food for thought, because we can take that and we can also say it, given that one of the top priorities for your LPs is creating early liquidity options, I'd love to tell you more about the potential exit routes we identified. That's another way that you can personalize. Pietro also bootstrapped Neo Network up to 25 million ARR, which I think is incredible. Another way that you can say it literally to him in an email, as we are currently bootstrapping, I'd love your take on what we've got, a nod to your success from Neo Network. I had Claude analyze all of the emails that I had ever sent on behalf of the founders back when I was running my business. I'm not running my business anymore. I'm now working for a venture capital fund and an accelerator. I'm a head of investor relations for them, and I'll speak more to that towards the end of the session. But when Claude analyzed all of my emails, I asked him, what words were I using the most? And it found that a nod to your background was my favorite. I was using it in so many different emails. And it always made me wonder if any of the investors would clock onto the fact that suddenly there is this wave of founders, different founders, messaging them with kind of like the same words. I was like, where are they getting this from? So, 7 touch points to get investors' attention. Or naturally, you can skip all of that and get a warm introduction. Another thing that I want to say is that when it comes to your first cold email and the first follow-up, this is the 2 tactics I was executing within 2 days. This is because your prospect's interest is the highest in the first 48 hours, and then it massively drops off the cliff. So on the example of one of my clients that I was working with, we sent out the first email on July 10th, and then followed up promptly on July 11th, the next day. And then we got a response. This was a tier 1 VC. She responded on a Saturday, and she said, thanks for your message. Do you have a deck that you can share? So myself, being an amazing businesswoman and loving my clients, I respond as the founder on the weekend. Absolutely, see the deck here. And then I've shared the DocSend link. That was July 12th. Then no response. We followed up 4 days later, no response. We followed up 10 days later, no response. We followed up, then following week, no response. We followed up again, and then finally, we got a response just to say, given your geographic focus, this isn't going to be a fit for our fund. And this has been 3 weeks worth of emailing with traction and updates and so many of the different things that we had to work on. And for those of you guys who are fundraising, whether you are founders trying to reach VCs or whether you are GPs trying to reach LPs, I need you to be prepared for a scenario like this, where you're going to put so much effort into chasing a dream tier 1 investor that you genuinely know they could invest in you if they wanted to, but sometimes it might literally turn out to be absolutely nothing. It's kind of like being dealt, like a really, really good hand in poker, and then someone else bluffs perfectly, and there's nothing you can do about it. They win. So as you are focusing on fundraising, and every single minute that you spend on fundraising is a minute that you have not been building your business, and that eats away from some of those traction and progress and updates that you could sell, or what I call your ammo. So you always need to ensure, as far as cold emailing goes and following up goes, you need to ensure you've got enough of ammo for 2 emails. This is my tracker that I had for one of my clients. Have you got enough of things to say for 3 emails, for 4 emails? What about 5? What about 6? What about 7? I've had email chains 7 emails long, and then the investor actually responded. And then they were like, yeah, let's have a call. Sounds great. And usually, like the 7, so usually I would give up around here, around email number 4 in the email chain, unless it's a very important investor, unless we genuinely know there is a strong fit, then I would just keep going. until we got a response. So I think with that one flagship client that I was working with him last year over summer. So that was June, July, August. And I think in total, I must have sent out about like 300 emails for him. And responses, I think, was something like 70%, maybe 75%. Then going to a meeting, I think about 50%. And then resulting in investment, I think about 30%. Angels, mostly. Private individuals, family offices. So at pre-revenue stage, there's a few different moves that you can make that are pretty small, that can maybe not necessarily land you a meeting, but they're very important, and I would paraphrase them, and I would give an analogy here of pawns on a chessboard. That's your opening moves. That's how you open the conversation with an investor. You could say, like we've piloted the platform now. We've got 3 letters of intent. We've built a wait list. So that's usually when you're pre-revenue. The moves that you can make are pretty small. It's usually just pawns moving on the chessboard. Then as your business grows and you generate your first revenues, you can then make some bigger moves and bigger swings that can land you meetings with investors more easily. Because you could say, we signed our first paying client. That's usually the moment where you're going to get a response when you say that. Or we're contracting with XYZ. You can name drop some of the people you've got. That's what can secure your response too. Then when you reach 100K level ARR, that's another benchmark that a lot of funds have. That's when you can mention even more stuff. And that's usually where you should be in a follow-up number 3 or follow-up number 4. If you haven't gotten a response yet. And those follow-ups can be far and in between. I have a 5 years long email chain with a partner at Sequoia, and every single time I email him in the same email chain, without fail, he responds to me. So I'll never get rid of my domain that I have for my business, because I literally have this golden email chain where I've been messaging him various different things over the years, like sending deals, sending my clients, asking for a job, and like, a bunch of other things. So we've got this, 5-year-long email relationship going on with Sequoia. Then when you reach the 1 million ARR, that's usually one of the most powerful moves that you can make on this, let's say, chessboard of a fundraising world. Because usually when you send an email saying, we just crossed 1 million ARR, that's when so many meetings drop for you. Or something that can lead to a checkmate, I would say, is when you're EBITDA positive. Because with one of my clients, we actually sent out emails that said, well, we're now technically profitable, and we actually don't need to raise. But, if there is a fund that wants to come in at the current valuation that we're at, we wouldn't mind. Should we chat? And then we've had so many meetings drop in and so on. So that's definitely what I would call a checkmate on an investor. And the important thing to understand from this chess analogy is that you do not want to lose your strongest pieces first. So if this is your first email where you've mentioned all of those bullet-pointed amazing achievements, my question to you is, what if they don't respond? What are you going to say in a follow-up? If you've played all of your cards already and you've got nothing to say in a follow-up email besides, did you have a chance to read? So I would suggest take out some of those, let's say, pieces of information. You take some of them out, and you leave them for a follow-up. Because chances are you might even close a meeting by saying less, and saying less is very important. My current GP and a CEO of our company, he says he's going to tattoo himself, say less, on here, because that's literally his motto when it comes to fundraising, and he himself has raised over 100 million for his companies, and he is a thrice-exited entrepreneur. So to me, it's like, I'm so glad I'm working for you. So I would say, yes, take some of those pieces out. And then that can help you build those touch points. The strongest touch point that you can get is obviously a warm introduction or a referral. And there is an art of asking for it as well. Because if you just ask for an introduction by saying, hi, Stefan, great event, was great to connect. Would you be able to connect me to so-and-so? chances are you're not going to get a response to that. So this is what my client had sent out, and we were left on red. So then I stepped in, and I followed up. And what I said is, Stefan, if that helps, I'm including what could be said in such an intro. And then you include the actual copy and paste blurb that your introducer can copy and paste and use it. I've also included the person's LinkedIn so that they could actually go on LinkedIn and figure out who is this person that I'm being asked to introduce someone to. And then I also said, I've got his email as, and then I've stated his email, not sure if that's the one he is using actively. And then the fourth thing that I did is that I said he is hands down one of the ideal investor targets for us. If your relationship with him would warrant an intro, this would likely go a long way. So 4 different things that were 4 steps in removing the number of steps that my introducer has to take in his introducer user journey in order to actually introduce me to someone else. Like the moment you do your homework for them, people are going to extend more favors to you because you've made it very, very easy. So that person can literally not even open any new tab, but just copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, boom, send. It will take them 20 seconds, let's say. And they can do it in between of meetings, and they can do it literally when they're doing not anything else. And the result, this was sent 24th of July. The result was 1 day later, rockstars in your field, if that helps, including what could be said in such an intro. He literally just copied and pasted all of this. And the resulting of that intro was that we have secured, I think, a 30K check from that investor that was introduced in that way. And so when it comes to how venture capitalists make decisions, it won't come to you as a surprise that most of this comes from warm introductions, but also VCs initiating contact with entrepreneurs themselves. So this is usually where I talk a lot about, this is why LinkedIn is so important, whether we like it or not, but building in public, presence, thought leadership, making yourself discoverable, making yourself found, and making it known that you are speaking to investors. One of the companies that is fundraising, as I had found out, they've invited me to an investor dinner, what was like a room of 60 people filled with like mostly family offices and VCs and so on. And I thought that was incredible. That was amazing. Great dinner. And then the motives became clear afterwards because they were asking me for a few of introductions. And I'm kind of thinking, yeah, I'll introduce you. That was a lovely dinner. So also, you know, in a way, like extending a favor or like opening exclusive access to something, you've chosen someone, you have a much better chances of then asking them for a few favors in return. So events and LinkedIn and then doing all of that stuff, that's very important. Because ultimately, when it comes to how you fundraise and how you actually get an investment, coming back to the very first slides, where it's not about how good your business is, it is, in a way, the art of winning an unfair game. But what I like to say about this is that similarly like in poker, you don't need to have the best hand to actually win. You just need to know how to play the right cards and how to get in the right rooms and be able to, you know, form the connections that matter. And with that, I've been speaking very fast because that's pretty much done. So I'm really glad to have a really long time for questions. Thank you very much. And I might also add a few more sentences on what I do currently. So I'm head of investor relations at Tramlines Ventures. We are an AI venture builder plus a fund where we work with pre-seed founders. We're talking founders who have not raised any money before. We build their companies as AI native from day one, and we aim to exit them within a much shorter time frame than 10 years. So we're not so much focused on building unicorns. We are focused on building revenue-first businesses that are revenue-generating within the first year of operations, and then ideally they exit within the time frame of our accelerator, which is 24 months, We work with them hand in hand. Every single week, they get about like 15 hours from our team. We build their products. We've got a bunch of AI engineers that were hired in-house. And within the 24 months that we're working with them, we aim to get them either towards an exit, profit-led growth, or a very, very successful Series A. And although I am not directly on the investment team, I'm on the investor relations team, so I'm talking to LPs, I'm talking to other investors. We are accepting applications for our September cohort, so worth saying. So do connect with me on LinkedIn, do send me a note, do go on our website. We do a bunch of really cool things. And now, welcome any of your questions, guys.
Hi, so the question I had is that when you said the mail,
Yeah.
including the LinkedIn for the referral, so can you just go back to that? Because I didn't understand that
Okay.
perfectly.
Tell me, oh, can I go back? I cannot. Oh, I can, okay, cool. Well, that's gonna be a lot of slides. Which one was that?
So when you asked for a referral, and
Yeah.
then you added that this is my LinkedIn, or?
Yes, okay, in the intro. No. So, this was the LinkedIn of the investor that we were asking to be introduced to. Because basically what you want to do is that, if I receive an email like this, okay, I can easily check who this person is, think in my head, how do I know them? Maybe if I open my messages with them, there will be a message history in which I had said, great to meet you at South Summit. And it becomes so much easier to actually, you just make it easier for your introducer. And as far as introducers go, that's also very, very important. Not every introducer is a good introducer for you. And it's usually the paid introducers that I would be wary of, the ones that are asking for a success fee, because you want to gauge their reputation somehow, because if this is someone who has been bombarding the same investor with shitty deals, you don't want to get bundled up with them, right? So yeah, that's something very much important to know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very simple, straightforward question in the times of AI.
Yeah.
As an investor, which startup mode, from your perspective, would be the hardest to replicate in the AI era?
Yeah, I love that you asked this. There's only one mode that exists right now, and it's the tacit knowledge that we have, the domain expertise in people's heads. It's actually part of our entire thesis at Tramlines Ventures. We only back domain experts who have, like, let's say 20, 25, 30 years of experience in their space. Because as far as the argument for industrializing intelligence goes, the technology is not the problem. Like, anyone can vibe code anything. So the only thing that remains defensible is the tacit knowledge that people have inside of their heads, the networks they've built in the industries, how well do they know the dynamics of the entire industry. And when it comes to building the AI infrastructure layer around it, this is the insight coming directly from our director of technology, who was one of the first 4 employees at AWS, and then a national technology officer from Microsoft UK. The issue with industrializing that is the challenge of having this data structured cleanly enough to build anything defensible on top of it. So many of the domain experts who apply to our program and so on, they know all of their stuff, but that's just in their heads. And think of how many notes do you guys have on your notes app? And how messy are they? Or how many processes in your companies go undocumented? Someone gets onboarded and this is how we do stuff, and this thing is spoken. It's never AI transcribed. So also, as far as hiring goes, every single new joiner in your company, because of the information asymmetry, they will have a slightly different view of the company. And so having this data organized cleanly enough, I would say that's the biggest moat that you can ask for. Like, we use Claude extensively in our company. There isn't a meeting that goes uncaptured. Claude is connected to HubSpot, Granola, Microsoft Outlook, to Company's House API as well, and all of that, like absolutely everything. And so it's incredible to me when I can go on our Fixer and ask a global question of like, across all of the meetings that all of my team members have had in the past month with that portfolio company, can you sum up to me what are their challenges and what are their recent progress and metrics? So the clean data is the mode. Like your domain expertise translated into clean data. And that's where language and linguistics comes into place, and that's like a huge interest of mine. Maybe because English is my second language. I've been studying it for nearly 30 years. It's now very interesting that it's actually our language and how well we think and how well we write prompts that will be the advantage of how good of AI systems we can build. Does this answer the question? Thank you. Amazing. Any other questions? We've got 18 minutes, guys, so I can, like, if you want me to freestyle an outreach email for you, I probably could do that. Yes, go on.
I'm actually writing you a message on LinkedIn right now, so
I love that.
I will better ask you in person then.
Yeah.
So we actually hit 100K ARR,
yes.
And we are currently pivoting to B2B2C.
Okay.
And so will we be a good fit for your program? Because basically we are reinventing our whole tech.
Have you raised any external investment?
So that was for 5% equity shares, 50K 3 years ago, and this is my co-founder right now.
Okay, because we invest 250K at the earliest of stages, and there's a certain percentage equity that we aim for, which usually translates to 2 million pre-money valuation maximum.
Okay. Yeah, got you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask maybe less technical question, but as you mentioned previously about this domain expertise that you have to build in order to translate your knowledge into like better outputs. But what about maybe the junior professionals? How to maybe try to seem credible, or is it just better to build up this foundation, and how you know you're ready to reach out?
Building a business already, or are you talking junior business? Are you talking junior professional entering the workforce?
Probably entering the workforce, or even building something. And
Okay. I've never thought about it that way, actually. If anything, I would be focusing on that presence and, like the whole thought leadership piece, right? So like, if you can either start posting on LinkedIn or start, on Substack and so on. Like, I think like right now, if anything, we've got access to all of the information that is, at the touch of a button. But I think something that I've seen people do really successfully is just to structure it and organize it into more digestible chunks. And that's why a lot of newsletters who just list a number of events happening in your areas usually end up being the newsletters that are so incredibly oversubscribed. But specifically to your question, if you want to seem more credible, you have to write credibly. If you want to seem more knowledgeable, you got to educate yourself and then actually say it, actually speak it, right? It's incredible to me when I went from running my own business back to being in a company, when I've realized that how important it actually is that you send out emails where your senior leadership is on CC and that emails show your thinking, right? They outline your thinking. They show that you can think of how your role and how the small task that you're doing fits into this whole larger system, because that's executive thinking. That's forward thinking. And you might have this inside of your head, but unless you actually put it in writing where your senior leadership can read it, they won't know. They won't know. So this is that, like important thing of actually speaking it, saying it out loud. I also do think that metaphysically or whatever how when you say things out loud, there's something bigger at play. And so I would say there might be a little bit of an imposter syndrome at first. It was for me. So I started posting on LinkedIn some 5 years ago, and I haven't stopped. And in the beginning, I knew nothing about the venture capital space, and I was thinking, like, what the hell am I going to write about? But I did some research, I educated myself, I found something interested, I posted it in a way that was mine, in my tone of voice, my take on it, my understanding of it. And I grew my LinkedIn from 0 to 50,000 followers. And pretty much everything for me came from LinkedIn, and I'm not sponsored by LinkedIn, by the way. But yeah, like, 12 years ago, I moved to UK from Poland, where I'm from, without anyone. So like, not a parent, not a friend, not a single connection. So everything had to be built so much from scratch. I didn't have anyone vouching for me or anyone introducing me to anyone. So it literally, I had to like build my entire career on the back of like cold messages. It's like, hi, this is me. This, you know, like, well, no one that they would know from Eastern Europe, and you just, you know, you gotta make it.
I really relate because I'm Ukrainian,
Nice.
and I also emailed my way into the UK.
There you go. My current role with Tramlines Ventures, I cold emailed them. So that's, you know, it's quite nice, like coming in full circle. But yeah, I hope that answers.
Yeah,
in some
thank you
way.
so much. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, we've got some questions.
Where do you think it will go with AI cold outreach? So I think probably you also get cold outreach from AI.
Yeah.
Would you respond less to them?
I would.
Yeah,
I
and
would.
how it on your table? Do you set up an AI to respond to the startups?
Say that second part
Yeah,
again?
I mean, once you know that the startup will reach out to you via an AI, would you be also open to set up an AI to respond to them as well? So the AI will do the outreach on both sides and in the end schedule meetings?
I mean, no, to be honest with you, look, if it's genuinely in our thesis, if it's genuinely something that I have something to say about it and I will want to talk about it, then even if it was written by AI, it's fine. I can respond because there's something interesting there for me. But if it's not really targeted and it's written by AI, that's like a double sword. And even here, right, at South Summit, you know, I was getting the connection request via the app. And in so many of the connections, different people from different countries mentioned the same thing. Your ability to craft innovative narratives for investors. And I was like, everyone the same thing.
You also declined my request, by the way.
Did you use those words?
I used the AI and yeah, that was shitty.
Then let's have a chat afterwards.
No, it's cool. I'm fine. Funny.
There are questions?
I wanted to ask, so you mentioned that you have been like writing posted on LinkedIn and everything, and you work at a VC.
Yes.
So can I ask, like, how do you kind of balance the work and the LinkedIn posted, given that like it do not like violate the ethic of the work, or like you cannot post about like something that is related to the company, that like there's some maybe some deal, some startup that the company is figuring out, and like maybe you cannot post about it. So like
No. So obviously, yeah, like nothing confidential, and I would never post anything that, you know, relates to the deals that we were doing. I would typically post a lot about what you have heard and hear today. So how do you personalize the messages, or like how the power law dynamics works, or like whatever I would learn something interesting about the VC space in general, not like internal to the company. Whatever was internal to the companies that I would used to work for, then obviously we would need to check with whatever appropriate department to see, can I actually post that? But my entire LinkedIn thought leadership has been built purely on just talking about the more generic industry dynamics. Or let's say not generic, generic is the wrong word for it, external industry dynamics. But yeah, I would usually post about like 2 or 3 times per week. I never followed like a set schedule. I never followed set timings. It was just kind of like, let's just make sure there's always something coming out. And for the first year or 2 years, nothing major happened. But then I think in the second year, that's when suddenly I saw like this growing like this. And I started to get invited to speak. Like I was speaking at Money 2020 last year because their head of program DM'd me on LinkedIn. He saw one of my posts and was like, "Want to speak at Money 2020?" I'm like, "Sure." So it's really quite nice when you build a platform where you can do that at. So it helps. There.
Dzień dobry, Eva.
Dzień dobry. Dzień dobry.
Thank you for the presentation. It's very actually interesting for, I believe, both of investors and startups. I ask you about some maybe hacks how to the investors push them to reach startups. Like how startup can make the situation when investor reach the startup, like vice versa. Yeah. What kind of things the startups should do? Maybe some ideas how to initiate it through the press or some other things.
Yeah. I mean, look, get yourself speaking on panels, right? Get yourself at events. Organize your own events. Private investor dinner, for example, amazing. And then you send an invite. We're hosting an investor dinner. It will be a chance to connect with a bunch of your other peers. Would you like to come? And it's an incredible tactic. So this is literally like I do investor relations now. This is literally what we do. We do dinners. And it's incredible because like the moment you can put a subject line that says RSVP, 5-star Michelin star restaurant dinner, investor dinner, you get a lot of responses. So, building community events in that way, that helps. I'm also thinking, yes, the speaking opportunities, your online presence, building in public, big, get yourself on podcast, you can speak and so on. So anywhere where you can think of being discoverable, or also on the topic of back channeling, if you're trying to reach a certain investor, if you can have a business connection or a friend, or let's say a friendly event organizer, casually mention your name or your startup name to that investor at an event, or mention you, and then they'll tell you, okay, yeah, done that, or I'll mention you at that panel event where I'm speaking this evening, and then you follow up the next day, like right next day. Chances are you might land that engineered serendipity moment where they will say, I've just heard about you yesterday. What a coincidence. So the moment you kind of like start to think like how we make decisions as humans and work backwards, and Claude can be amazing in mapping it out, that's how you can really kind of like flip the odds into your favor. And that's why I call it like the unfair game, because a lot of it is really like psychology and behavioral science, which are my two favorite topics. And I'm sure the more that I go into it, there's going to be more and more and more editions of this masterclass. But yeah, those are like some of the first things that come to my mind.
Yeah, thank you a lot. Just you mentioned last one about this human things, and one of my friends as well suggests to learn NLP techniques with the speaking to the investors, and it's kind of helps to close deals as well.
And I've been asked a few times if I've read any of the NLP books, which I have not, but now I'm kind of like I probably should. They are on my Kindle and they're not yet open, so I'm gonna try. Yes.
Eva, thank you. What a fascinating and insightful masterclass. My name is Fatima and I'm the founder of AIH. We're a social impact ecosystem convener based out of Europe and Africa. And you've really gone in depth in the VC space. You touched on the family philanthropic environment. And I'm particularly keen to understand your recommended strategy to reach out and form exactly the same relationships in that environment. At the Social Impact AI for Good event last year, they had a fascinating panel on the gatekeepers for family philanthropy. Now, it's a very different environment, right? And I'm very keen to hear your insights and guidance.
Yeah, and I now pretty much almost exclusively, if you were to look at my calendar at my work, all of the calls that I've got are almost entirely just family offices. So that's like the majority of my role right now. So same basic principles apply, but it is definitely an industry that is governed so much more by relationships. So yes, if you can identify someone who can introduce you, big plus. And I don't know how big your team is or how many friendly business connections you've got that you could ask for this specific favor. But what we've done in our team is that I ask all of my team members to export their LinkedIn connections, which you can do from the settings. And I ended up with like 10 huge spreadsheets of all of their connections. I've loaded them into Claude, and I've basically built like a full 6 degrees of separation map in Claude. How many people from our team collectively know this one person, right? And like, how could we get introduced and so on? And like a big project that we're working on is mapping this kind of like networks intelligence, because that's the moment where you'll be able to identify the right people to get that introduction for you. And then you mentioned panels. Panels are fantastic, and that's why I was attending quite many of them in here, because the moment someone speaks on a panel, you send them a message saying, comment on your panel. And like, hi, name, I really like what you said about this on your panel. It resonated because I'm building in this space, and what we have also observed is the following. You mentioned this, I don't quite agree with this. We have seen the other opposite. In any case, I think we could really like have like good conversation about this. Would you be open to connecting? So even in an email saying, would you be open to connecting? And I found that especially in the family office world, if you can come more from that peer-to-peer level of a conversation, you're said something interesting, and I am a thought leader in the impact space, and I feel I could have a good conversation with you. So literally just that, and not ever mentioning that you're raising in the span of the first 2 touch points. Like, never. Like, what you're coming in as is that yeah, I liked what you said. I've got some thoughts on that. Let's have an interesting conversation. Let's go for dinner. Let's exchange, thoughts on this. And that's really how, like Albert, our CEO, the one that was like 3 times exited, he says the same thing. Like, he literally says to me, I don't ever want you pitching. You're not pitching, you're just having a conversation with them on like what you find interesting, what is it that you're doing, and so on. And for like the first, let's say like 60% of touch points and interactions, that should be the name of the game, like building relationships. So you are in a space where it will take a little bit longer, but the payoff of that can be quite incredible. You're welcome. And we've got 1 minute left for potentially one question.
Hey, thank you so much for sharing your framework and all these tips that seem to come from first-hand experience in making mistakes and learning from them and iterating successes. And I wanted to ask if, apart from all this that you shared with us, if you have some reference, some books, or you share some here that help you, or talks that help you inspire on that?
Yeah, there's plenty. Someone has my phone. Could I grab my phone? Because like I've got all of the books on there. One is called Pitch Anything that I really like. Yes. There's also a book called Super Communicators that I really enjoyed. And then I'm literally just going to check my Claude for the ones that I want to check.
But you say you shouldn't be pitching 60% of the time, right?
Yeah.
So pitch anything.
Pitch anything, yes. There's also the status game that I like. There's another one called Crucial Conversations. Thinking Fast and Slow. Words That Change Minds. And also a book called Getting More. And a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini. So what I've done is that I've been reading them. So like when I was studying like behavioral science, I was reading all of the books and so on, and then I've realized, let me get all of them in a PDF format. Let me them all upload them into Claude, into a project space, and set up a communications coach on Claude that draws on the collective knowledge from all of those books. So whenever I'm writing high consequence emails to my senior leadership or to investors or to whatever, I'll just run it by this communication coach.